So today we're talking about the build phase of a periodized training program. The build phase comes after base and is before peak. This phase is meant to last roughly 6 to 8 weeks. You can extend that a little further. You got to be a little careful about how you would do that. And every third or fourth week would still be a recovery week. Not that you would drop to zero, but you're going to take it a little easier. So the build phase, our goal is to start challenging our thresholds and also start incorporating a lot more race specific pacing. Those workouts are meant to occur, at a good amount of time, spaced out from each other, as well as be very specific. So a threshold level workout would be something like 6 by 3 minutes running at 10K pace with a couple minutes of recovery. A race specific workout, if you're training for a half Ironman, for example, would be doing 3 by 20 to 30 minutes at half Ironman intensity on the bike with 5 or 10 minutes of recovery in between. For most people, half Ironman intensity would be somewhere in the 80 to 87% range of functional threshold power. So we're challenging threshold and we're working on race specifics. Now, I want to talk about this within the context of a beginner triathlete, an intermediate triathlete, and an advanced triathlete. So you have some samples to go off of. Now, a beginner athlete, let's say they've been averaging 6 to 8 hours, right? They just did 10 or 12 weeks of base training, which was almost all endurance, steady state, nothing hard at all. So we have to be careful with an athlete like this. We want to transition them into interval training gently, right? We don't want to scare them away and they'll be like, this sucks. I never want to come back here. So workouts that you might do for a beginner athlete like this, who's getting ready for a sprint, potentially an Olympic distance triathlon, we could start with 6 by 400s on the track at 10K to half marathon intensity. So we got to have a real discussion about how fast is fast. And for an athlete like this, it does not need to be too fast yet, right? It's very easy to get hurt in running. So we got to be very careful and make sure they understand what they're doing. Intensity wise, you would keep this in like the tempo, kind of like moderate hard, zone 3 for these athletes, these newer athletes. That would be a sample for running. For the bike, we could do 6 by 2 minutes, maybe 5 by 3 minutes, also at roughly the same intensity. If you've established a FTP for this athlete, then you want to max that FTP on these intervals out at like 85%, right? So we're limiting their higher end so that they don't get hurt. That's going to be fine because when you get to the peak phase of training, you can do a little more intensity, especially if they've adapted to all of this well. For this athlete training 6 to 8 hours a week on average, I wouldn't recommend cutting back their recovery weeks as far as volume of time goes, but you could dial back the intensity quite a bit. Instead of intervals and tempo and whatever you had them doing on the weekend, they just do easy, steady all week. Lets their body recover, maybe throw in some extra yoga, things like that. The reason being, when you're below 10 hours of training, it's just, as far as triathlon training goes, it's a low amount of time and it really doesn't make sense to reduce your training much more than where you're already at for athletes under 10 hours a week. So that would last 6 to 8 weeks, right? 2 or 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 or 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Let's talk about the intermediate athlete. They could be doing an Olympic distance to a half Ironman, potentially an Ironman, but I'm going to talk about Olympic distance and half Ironman workouts. So we're attempting to challenge their threshold, right? 100% of FTP, zone 4, 5A, that threshold on lactate threshold. And those kind of workouts are going to be 5 or 6 by 3 minutes at or over threshold with 2 or 3 minutes recovery. If it's a tough week already, you could keep that at like the 90 to 95% of threshold as far as FTP goes, or zone 4 for heart rate. So it's below lactate threshold. That also still helps push up the threshold. and are getting into more race specific workouts, we could be doing 3 by 10 minute, 3 by 15 minute, 3 by 20 minute at for a iron for a Olympic distance athlete. That would be at like a zone 4, 90 to 95% of threshold, depending, well, maybe 85% to 90% for an intermediate athlete as far as Olympic distance goes. And for if they were doing a half, then you'd be doing like 3 by 20 minute at 80 to 85% of functional threshold power. Other specific workouts for an athlete like this, I would like to see them do at least once, where this is in the build phase, where they bike. If they're doing Olympic distance, I got to straighten this out. They bike 20 or 25 miles building into their race goal pace, and then they run 3 to 5 miles off the bike at race goal pace. That would be a key workout. You would include that at the end of a recovery week. For a half Ironman intermediate athlete, you would want to see them do something like a 40 to 50 mile bike at the high end for this level of athlete, with a 6 to 8 mile run off the bike. Very much a key workout. All of that would be at or slightly under, frankly, at this phase of training, slightly under race pace. Because they still have several weeks to go until the race itself, right? Another really good one for the intermediate half Ironman athlete, we'd be doing something like 3 times 45-minute bike, 20-minute run, where they progressively increase the intensity throughout that workout. So the first round is easy, the second round is like moderate Ironman pace, let's say, and the third round is the one where they're going half Ironman or Olympic distance effort on that. It's very challenging. It's great for mental training. It's great for pacing practice and nutrition management. So with those athletes, let's say they've been averaging 10 to 12 hours a week, maybe even a little more. You do want to drop the volume a little bit on their recovery weeks. So that recovery week could be anywhere from 6 hours to 10 hours. Maybe they swim extra, run less, do a little extra yoga, little less time on the bike, drop down the intervals throughout the week. Maybe it's just all easy, steady pacing with some running drills, a handful of strides, maybe some spin ups on the bike, but just nothing you would consider challenging. And then on the weekend, you do a key workout or a race, because racing is really where you find out if you're making progress. And then with a Ironman level athlete who is experienced, so we're talking about an advanced Ironman athlete in the build phase of training. Now, this volume could be anywhere from 12 hours to 20 plus hours, so it's a wide range of what we're dealing with. But an athlete like this is going to have a lot of experience, a lot of racing under their belt, a lot of knowledge regarding injuries and injury prevention and things like that. They may still be crazy and like trying to hurt themselves all the time, but we're assuming that they're going to be good at managing their effort levels. So this kind of athlete, you're going to challenge, frankly. You are going to be doing workouts where you're challenging their threshold with 5 by 6 minutes at 100% of FTP with only 3 or 4 minutes of recovery on the bike. You could do the same thing as far as running goes, with like 1 mile repeats at 10K pace, which is threshold essentially, or even harder than threshold. You could be doing I'd be careful with the 12 by 400s, but you could do 6 by 800s at 10K pace, maybe a little faster. The reason I hesitated with those 400s on the track regarding running, with the volume of training that you're doing as an advanced Ironman athlete, the bang for you buck that you get out of minute and a half intervals of hard running is questionable with the risk reward of getting hurt, because you're already training a lot, you're already doing a lot of other stuff. Doing these 5K type workouts when you're preparing for an Ironman is not the best investment in your time, and it's very risky. So I'm not saying don't do it. If you're young and you're super fit and you come from a running background, go ahead, get some of that in during the build phase of training. In the peak phase, you're going to move more towards race specifics, and I really wouldn't recommend it then for Ironman level athletes. But if you want to go out and run your 400s at 10K to half marathon pace, that's a different story. Less risk and potentially more appropriate for Ironman training. So the other thing you're going to do as an Ironman athlete in the build phase, you're going to do some key tests. Maybe you race a half Ironman at this point or an Olympic distance. And a great workout for this level of athlete is going to be a triple brick of 3 by 25 to 30 mile bike, followed by a 3 or 4 mile run 3 times through. We would also progress the effort on that. First round would be warm up, below Ironman effort. Second round would be Ironman effort to maybe slightly harder than Ironman effort. And third round would be, you could stay at Ironman effort, totally appropriate, or you could bounce it up to half Ironman effort, right? So again, we're working on a lot of nutrition management. We're working on pacing, mental toughness, all that stuff that comes into play in the final miles of a long race. Recovery wise, this athlete should be dropping down the volume, not all the way to 50% of your maximum week, but you could go to 60 to 75%. So we're going from 20 hours of training down to 12 to 15 hours of training, but drop the intensity, swim a little more, run a little less, do more yoga, do more stretching, all the stuff that you've been skipping, right? Because I know you guys have been skipping your strength and your stretching. Do more of that in your recovery weeks. And then finish with a weekend of testing or racing. So this has all been about the build phase of training, which is a 6 to 8 week period for most people. You can extend it a little further, but that's roughly the time frame that you're looking at. And this was regarding triathletes. You can extrapolate this for marathon training, for half marathon training, for marathon swimming. Yeah, I hope that helps. If you want to see about the base phase of training, it's on one of these sides. I forget which. Thanks.